So hopefully Barry is waiting, and please enjoy the presentation. And here's Barry now.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening. Welcome to this webinar on St Clements Church and the bells of St Clements Project. There's a meeting room at St Clements Church in Cambridge. I'm going to start with a quick history lesson. First of all, I'm going to try and show my first illustration. If you're familiar with Cambridge, you might recognise this view from the crossroads on Castle Hill, looking down to the bridge over the Cam, with Cambridge proper on the far side. The Tower of St Clements is in the middle of the photo. Now imagine standing here 200 years before the Battle of Hastings. The year is 866, and you're looking along the old Roman road towards Colchester. Behind you are the remains of the Roman fort. There would have been a couple of farming settlements on this side of the river, with names linking them to the fort. On the left was Chesterton. That's an Anglo-Saxon name meaning the farm by the fort. The one to the right of the road was Grantchester, a name much more like the Roman name of the fort, so possibly there were still descendants of the Romans living there. The church a few yards away from here on that side is dedicated to St Peter, who was closely connected with Rome. Both these communities later migrated along the river in opposite directions when Cambridge was expanding. But at this time, Cambridge as such probably didn't exist. There really weren't any towns in those days. Over the river, where Cambridge is now, would have been open land. Just 1 year before this, England had been invaded by a great heathen army, Danes or Vikings. They'd landed in Norfolk and moved up to York. You now jump forward 9 years to 875, and they were in control of most of England. They would also have been right in front of you, filling the area just over the river with their camp. This became their base for a number of years. They built a defensive ditch. They were supplied by ships sailing or rowing up the Cam. And each spring, they set off down the Icknield Way to attack Alfred the Great in Wessex. And some of them went round the coast in their boats. Finally, in 878, they were defeated at the Battle of Edington. They signed a peace treaty with Alfred and returned to Cambridge. Their leader was called Guthrum. Guthrum became a Christian and ruled as king of this area until he died in 890. And this map, courtesy of Wikipedia, shows his kingdom with Cambridge at the centre. So the town of Cambridge grew round the area where the army camped and where St Clements is now. I can imagine Guthrum or someone in his retinue employing a priest once they were converted to Christianity. Sometime later, although we don't know when, a church was built and dedicated to St Clement. That name usually indicates a Danish presence in the area. The present building wasn't started until the early 13th century, but the story of the church goes right back to the beginning of Cambridge. So does anything apart from its history make St Clements special? At first sight, it's an easy church to ignore. It looks a bit grubby and uninspiring from the road. Its Tudor windows and funny little tower. It tends not to be mentioned in the guidebooks. I first came here 6 years ago, when the then vicar of Great St Mary's suggested it was a possible place for a new ring of bells, which I'd been thinking would be a good idea in order to increase the amount of teaching we do in Cambridge. When I visited, I found it surprisingly attractive inside, although it was very run down, with leaky roofs and a partially collapsed ceiling. It looks older than I expected when you get inside, with early Gothic arches either side of the nave, making it possibly the first Gothic church in Cambridge. At the time of my visit, the church had an unpaid priest and a small aging congregation. They made me feel welcome. Since then, I've become more and more involved. The most striking feature of the church is not particularly old. The chancel was remodelled in the 1860s and 70s to suit what was then the new Anglo-Catholic style of worship. There's no east window, The whole of that wall is painted with a mural, as you can see. The artist was Frederick Leach, a notable local painter who had a business decorating buildings in the arts and crafts style. Painted ceiling and rood beam and the iron railings were all part of the design. They all need cleaning and restoration as well, but that's another story. Another surprising feature of the church was only finished this year. For the last couple of years, we've shared the church with Cambridge's Russian Orthodox congregation. And part of the agreement we made with them, which provides a good part of our income, was to allow them to install a folding icon screen called an iconostasis. This is needed for Russian Orthodox services, as they like the chancel to be completely cut off from the nave. It's in two halves, and each half has a fold in the middle, and it all goes back against the walls when it's not in use for their services. They have their regular services on Saturday evening and early on Sunday morning. Then the church is returned to its Anglican state in time for our service at 11 o'clock. We also had to make the pews movable, as the Russians stand and walk around in their services. This view shows the pews as they are set up at the moment, a socially distanced individual prayer. Any pews not in use are stored in the north aisle. A lot has been achieved since my first visit. St Clements has changed from being rather run down with a small congregation into a church with confidence in its future, which is now a suitable home for our Bell project. I joined the PCC, which had lots of ideas for reviving the church. Fortunately, we adopted a plan compatible with what is needed for the bells. Potential cost was daunting. We've achieved a great deal. 5 significant projects have been completed in the last 5 years. There are more in the pipeline. The first priority was to mend the leaky roof and holes in the ceiling in the south aisle. That was done with the help of a government grant for repairing roofs, and the inside of the aisle was redecorated. Then we had a competition to choose an architect to produce an overall development plan to meet our needs. While the chosen design was being developed, we had the heating system replaced. Keeping the church heated every day in the winter is a big priority, to allow it to be used as much as possible. This will be a big advantage when we want to use the bells every day. The third and fourth projects were to get on with the first stages of the development. You can see a new structure behind the arches on the left. It contains a kitchen and toilets, and the upstairs meeting room where I am at the moment. While that was being built, we were also making the changes needed to accommodate the Russians. Project 4 was remodeling the area at the west end to make it the church's main entrance. You can see the new double doors at the back and the repositioned font in front of them. And there's a wheelchair lift to get anyone who might need it down the 2 steps from the street. The final project, number 5, was to replace another roof, this time on the north side, which also had some significant leaks. We had a grant for this from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We now think we have a watertight church, or at least we hope so. All this has cost a lot of money. Well over £500,000 has been spent already. Quite a feat for a poor church. Apart from the various grants we received, there was some money previously raised for repairing roofs. We had some payments from the Russians, some donations from members of the congregation. And we also had a sizable windfall resulting from leasing a section of the churchyard to an adjacent house that uses it as a garden. I'm now going to talk a bit about the tower. You can see that the church has a tower now, but for a long time it didn't. This sketch, drawn in the 18th century, shows it definitely didn't have one then. It was drawn by a collector of manuscripts called William Cole. His collection is now in the British Museum. Before the tower was built, the church did have a couple of bells. There was a reasonably large bell, hung in the churchyard in what William Cole called a disgraceful wooden steeple in an old tree. Fortunately for us, he left money in his will for a proper tower. He died in 1782, and it took 40 years of argument before the tower was actually built, not in the churchyard where he wanted it, but at the west end of the church, where it had to occupy the first bay of the nave to keep it out of the road. From outside, you might think it's a bit of an acquired taste. Slightly silly is what Pevsner called it. It's grown on me. The key point is that it originally had a spire, as can be seen in this painting of 1880. This is by Louise Rayner from outside Magdalen College. Luckily for us, the spire was taken down about 100 years ago, as it was thought to be unsafe. To explore inside the tower, you start by going up a very narrow spiral staircase to the first floor. That's the room you can see through the arch above the door in the centre of the picture. And this photo, by the way, was taken before the recent development projects. So that room on the first floor is going to be the ringing chamber. From there, you go up two very steep flights of steps inside a dark cupboard through a hole in the bell chamber floor. There are two bells up there. Both of them are older than the tower. The large one, the Great Bell, cast in 1691, weighs about 800 weight, 400 kilograms, and is presumably the one that was in the disgraceful wooden steeple. The other one is much smaller, effectively a Sanctus bell. It was cast in 1780 to replace an earlier small bell. It was probably hung on a bracket on an external wall. Both bells have wheels, so they can be swung, but neither are currently rung that way. Great Bell is rung for services, but only by clocking. That means pulling the clapper against the side of the bell with a rope. That's considered very bad practice, as you can end up with a cracked bell, but probably only if you pull very hard. The most striking feature in the bell chamber is the wooden framework that used to hold up the spire. If the spire was still there, we definitely wouldn't be able to make room for the new bells. To get permission for the bells, we had to apply for a faculty. It's the Church of England's version of planning permission. That caused quite a problem because of disagreements about how much of this framework could be removed. It was always the intention to keep the top part that we can see in this photo, but to take away the bottom part to make space for the bells and to make it easy to move around above and below them to maintain them and to tie the clappers. The existing bells also need to be moved out of the way. Advice on whether to grant a faculty is given by the diocesan bell advisor. Ours is a keen conservationist. He wanted us to keep all of the central posts that you can see right down to the floor. He suggested changing the frame design into one more like an H frame, for those of you who know what one of those looks like. But I thought that would make installing and maintaining the bells much more difficult. There was a bit of a stalemate for a time, but luckily I thought of a change to the original design, so we can keep the centre post without a serious problem. This plan shows the arrangement of the bells. You might be able to spot the centre post going through the middle. So what are the plans for this project and how much will it all cost? There will be 6 bells, with the tenor weighing slightly over 600 weight. That's lighter than a typical ring of 6, but it does mean that minimal strength is needed. We should be able to teach quite young children, perhaps before they leave primary school. Light bells can be a bit tricky. They turn quickly, and it's easy to pull too hard. That means we need to get the details right. They can be made to swing slightly more slowly than usual for this weight, and we'll make sure the stays do not break too easily. We want the experience of learning to ring to be as enjoyable as possible. Personally, I think it's important that the trainees will be ringing real bells rather than dumbbells. We also want an attractive room to ring them from, with easy access. The ground floor isn't suitable, and the existing spiral staircase to the first floor is far too steep and narrow. Fortunately, we've now got a staircase that's already been built up to the new meeting room, and it was always part of the plan to use this to get to the ringing chamber. Near the top of the stairs is a door that currently leads nowhere. You can just see it in this photo to the right of the large meeting room window. That door will in future lead to another short flight of stairs up to a balcony, which will be over the glass doors on the right-hand side of the picture. There'll be another pair of glass doors in the arch between the balcony and the ringing chamber. Because the tower itself is small, the balcony will add a valuable bit of extra space to accommodate more people. The meeting room will also be very useful for larger groups and for meetings. The ringing chamber will be made larger by demolishing the existing partition walls, and then the walls exposed behind them will need plastering. We need a new ceiling. We want to use the little Sanctus bell as a demonstration bell and hang it in a recess in the north wall. That will be useful because it won't be practical to take visitors up to the bell chamber to see the bells. And having something very much like a proper bell visible from the ringing chamber will make it much easier to explain how bells work. There are other things we need to spend money on, like electronic gadgetry for the best possible simulated sound inside, so that we can have teaching sessions without a lot of incessant donging being audible outside. This cross-section of the bell chamber shows some of the other features that we need. Firstly, we need opening windows for sound control, to control the sound when the bells are intended to be heard. And we need a steel ring beam to support the top half of the old spire framework, and then more steel work again near the top of the tower so that we can rehang the old great bell and continue to use it for services. On top of all that, we need some money left over for maintenance. And then quite a bit more would be useful because we want to pay someone part-time to manage the facility. Got to the end of the slideshow, so you can have to see me now. And I'm now going to try to describe what it will be like for someone interested in bells visiting St Clements when all this is finished. Let's assume they know nothing about ringing, but perhaps they've seen something on a website or in the tourist office or on a board outside the church and come in out of interest. If it is during opening hours for the ringing centre, which might be about 3 hours each day, they should find some displays to look at to keep them interested, someone to talk to, and literature to take away. If they arrive at the right time or book in advance, they could watch a daily demonstration. If anyone listening has been a bell ringer in Cambridge for a long time, you'll probably know about the demonstrations that Frank King gave every summer for over 30 years at Great St Mary's. Each day, he and 3 other ringers, who he'd bribed with curry points, would explain and perform simple change ringing on 4 bells to an audience of 20 or more, and then they'd end with a short piece on 8 handbells. At the end of the season, the helpers with the most curry points would be taken out for a curry, and the others had their points carried over to the next year. In that way, Frank raised a great deal of money for Great St Mary's bells. What we want to do at St Clements is to use modern technology so that a single presenter will be able to cover much the same ground and generate a useful income for the centre. Of course, most of the audience won't take their interest in ringing any further, but we do hope that seeds will be sown and publicity will be valuable. And we obviously hope some of the visitors will want to learn to ring. If they are just visiting Cambridge and don't have time while they're here, we'd be giving them information on who to contact near their home in order to learn. But if they were able to come back, they could book an introductory lesson or a course of lessons at St Clements. We'll have to charge for these as the running costs have to be covered, but we want to keep the charges low enough not to scare genuine recruits away. Teaching needs to be high quality to justify charging, So we intend to teach to ART standards. ART is the Association of Ringing Teachers. We will need to train more teachers as well and help them become qualified. To make all this possible, we'll be looking for a number of volunteer teachers. Finding them could be our biggest challenge. I think you can see why a part-time salaried manager will be needed to organise all of this. At the moment, most of the teaching in Cambridge is done by the University Guild. Each autumn, they recruit a number of new student members, many of whom need to be taught from scratch. The Guild will carry on organising their own teaching, but having St Clements available will make that task easier. They'll be able to have lessons more often and more conveniently than at other local towers. If the student recruits manage to learn more quickly, they'll get more out of their ringing in the short time they're in Cambridge. Another group of special interest is school-age ringers. There are far fewer teenagers learning to ring than when I started at that age. That means less social interaction with other ringers in their age group, which is a big loss. I also at that age really enjoyed 6-bell ringing, compared with the much more serious business of ringing on 8 bells or more. I really hope St Clements will be the focus of a revival of teenage ringing in this area, but it's still too early to plan how to bring that about. There will be problems with all of this. One issue, if we're as successful as I hope we will, is that we'll be training far more ringers than we'd need for a local band. That means we need our recruits to join other bands, or ideally, belong to other bands before they come to St Clements. The point of St Clements then would be to speed up their rate of learning, and not just for new recruits. We'll be providing more advanced training as well, and there's no limit to what can be practiced with the aid of simulators. One of the challenges of success, if we achieve everything we're setting out to do, will be to coordinate what we are doing with the needs of other towers. There's undoubtedly a need everywhere for more ringers and improved training, but we can't just recruit and train a whole lot of new ringers and send them out to towers that aren't able to accommodate them. That wouldn't be a good outcome, and we need to guard against that. This brings me to my final topic for the evening, which is how on earth are we going to pay for all this? Our target is to raise £250,000, which is pretty daunting. The good news is that well over a third of this has already been donated or promised, and some aspects of the fundraising plan are only just getting going. We're about halfway to the point where we can make a start on the work. So far, nearly everything has been given by individual ringers. Personally, I've put in a lot of time and a certain amount of money, so it might be worth describing what motivates me. As well as being my main hobby for most of my life, ringing has also been the cheapest one. Next in importance to me is sailing, which is much more expensive, although many sailors spend a lot more than I do. Most ringers spend more on their après ringing social life than they do on the expensive instruments they ring. So for me, it's a simple case of wanting to even things up a bit. There are various reasons why people might give some money, such as making a donation in someone's memory. But as I see it, for ringing to survive, at least some of us will need to gradually assume more responsibility for paying for it. There have, of course, been many recent projects paid for by generous donations, including the bells at Great St Mary's. But I hope more ringers will follow this example and not just leave it to someone else. There are other sources of money for us to tap. St Clements has already benefited from a number of grants over the last few years. We have to be careful not to affect the church's ability to raise more in the future. That still leaves a long list of possible bodies we can apply to. They all have their own priorities and constraints with regard to timing, so it's a complex process. And if anyone who's listening who feels like offering to help me with this, do let me know. I'm just trying to share my screen again, but I'm not sure if it's working. Oh, here we are. Yes, right. Now, just mention the website. So my main message that I want to leave you with is that now is a very good time to keep the fundraising momentum going. So if you're thinking you might make a donation, whether large or small, please don't wait until you forget about it. All the information you need is on our website. And if you can't remember the address, just Google Bells, St Clements, Cambridge, and it should come up straight away. Before I finish, I should mention this project is supported by all three of the local ringing societies. That's the Society of Cambridge Youths, the Ely Diocesan Association, and the Cambridge University Guild. And with that thought, I'll pass you back to Dave.
Thank you very much, Barry. It's been a great presentation. So I think the one of the questions is, it's a fantastic project. When do you think it will be ready?
Well, who knows? As I said, I think we're about halfway in the fundraising to get to the point where we can place orders for the work to start. And if we carry on getting donations in at a reasonable rate, I would hope that point would come early next year. So it's quite possible that we'll have bells perhaps by the middle of next year, sometime next year. I'd be disappointed if we don't get them by the end of next year.
And in terms of the money, we've got a question in from Andrew Morley, which is, are you planning to offer ringing tuition via adult education courses? He's previously lived in Devon, and that seemed to be a very effective route in.
That's quite an interesting idea, and I hadn't particularly thought about it. The church already hosts U3A courses in this meeting room, so U3A might well be interested in having a ringing course. That would be ideal.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And in terms of the the general populace, had you thought about whether sessions would be offered on a one-off basis, or you'd commit to a series, or have you thought along those lines, or would there be a minimum commitment? Roughly how much are people going to be paying for these sessions, I suppose, is what we're getting to.
Again, that's a difficult question to answer. We haven't really decided yet, but my thinking is that people often want an introductory lesson to something. They want to have a go at something, but then they don't take it up properly. So you could get quite a lot of tourists potentially wanting an introductory lesson in Cambridge. So I would charge a reasonable amount for that, because otherwise we'd be wasting our time, really. So we might as well get some money out of it. So it's probably over £10 for a first lesson. But if anyone actually really genuinely wants to ring and wants to book a course of lessons, then we would have, say, a block of 5 lessons that we'd sell much at a sort of lower rate per lesson, a significantly lower rate per lesson. So we try and get a sensible rate for the people who are keen to learn, and a higher rate for those who just wanted a quick pull and go away.
Yeah, I think that links into a question that Tom Ridgman has put in the chat, which is that he says that the Swan Tower in Perth raises a lot of money in a much less tourist intensive area than Cambridge. I know that it's a very long way away, but perhaps it's worth contacting them for some advice on how they're successful in bringing money into the project.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I think they do something on a daily basis as well. So they presumably have to manage with quite limited resources in their area in terms of numbers of ringers as well.
Okay. Yes, indeed. We've got a few other questions which have arrived. Michael Williams asks who will be providing the bells for the project.
Good question. We have gone out for quotes for bells, and we've asked, we haven't gone directly to the foundries, but we've gone to suppliers of bells and fittings and asked them to get quotes from tailors and Westley and an Italian foundry called Alenconi. And one of the contenders, Matthew Higby, has been importing Alenconi bells and is very enthusiastic about them. And I can say that the prices that I've had for him, that would be the cheapest. So that is a distinct possibility. And I'm hoping at some point to go and see and hear some of the Alenconi bells that Matthew has been importing.
Very exciting. And we sort of link almost directly into another question which has been asked. Is it correct that one of the bells will be dedicated to the memory of Felicity Webster, who was one of the previous secretaries of the Cambridge district?
That's something I'm very keen to promote, but at the moment there isn't enough money in the kitty to sort of say that a bell has been bought on behalf of Felicity. So anyone who knew Felicity, please think about making a donation. And it'd be lovely to get something in her memory.
Yeah, I agree very much so. It's, yeah, I think Fliss was, she became secretary just after I started my ringing career again here in Cambridge, and yes, it would be a fantastic way to remember her. So we've got quite a detailed question here from Ben Keating, and it was it's more a why didn't they type question, in terms of do you know if the prospect of building the tower out over the road was ever considered? So obviously there are models for that being done in other towers. So obviously St Peter Mancroft has the tower built out from the nave of the church. Ben says that that's how All Saints used to be in Cambridge. Any evidence that was ever considered?
I've not seen any evidence. Yes, the old All Saints was, of course, the one in Trinity Street, not the one in Jesus Lane. And yes, there are pictures of that with an arch, at least partly over the road. But I would guess that, yeah, the Bridge Street has always been the main road from Magdalen Bridge. So the bridge over the Cam, that is the reason why we're called Cambridge. That's the main road from there into the city centre. I don't think there's been any enthusiasm for blocking it as recently as 1822.
We've got a question in from Stephen Rowley, who says, "Thank you very much for the excellent presentation and interesting project. Has anyone considered installing bells at Little St Mary's? Would this be possible?"
Has Little St Mary's got a tower? I haven't noticed if it has.
Not particularly, and I think it's probably worthwhile to say that St Clements was not necessarily the first choice. So I think you've extensively looked at lots of the towers in Cambridge. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I looked around for a bit. In fact, I didn't even come into St Clements because I'd always looked at the tower as being rather too small. But actually, when you realise that it's not as small as it looks, because it hasn't got buttresses on the corners. If it had buttresses on the corners, it would look much bigger. But of course, it wouldn't be any bigger inside, which is what matters.
Sam Gorman points out that Little St Mary's has the base of a tower present, but nothing more. Yeah, I think that's certainly in line with my my recollection. Robin Shipp comments that there are some Italian bells being put at Hawkesbury near him, and Mr. Higby is responsible for that installation.
Yeah, I'm aware of somewhere else as well, I think, but where they're just about to be put in. So I'm certainly, and he's also doing the bells for Dordrecht, which I think are in his foundry at the moment, so he may have been shipped out by now. So yes, Matthew is really enthusiastic. He sort of, both on the sound and the quality of the casting, and the fact it's a traditional casting method. So he's strongly in favour of them.
Yeah, and Sue Marsden asks whether it would be possible to just invite donations from active towers in the district. She suggests that maybe an amount equivalent to their normal wedding fee would be a level that towers could consider. I think that's an interesting idea. She tacks on to the end a question: Will the bells be available for normal ringing, such as outings, peals, and quarters?
Well, I hope so. The one time when they won't be available is later on Saturday afternoons, because that's when the Russians have their first service of the weekend. So they won't. If you want to ring here and then have a ringer's tea, for instance, for a district meeting, it would have to be a little bit earlier than usual. But apart from that, I can't see why they wouldn't be available at a reasonable number of occasions. But I think they're going to be well used. That's the idea.
Tom Richmond adds to his account of the Swan Bells to say that they charge tourists for a talk, let them toll a bell and get a certificate. That links into a question that was being asked by Gareth Davis to say you can also, how about also offering them a video as a souvenir at extra cost, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. I'm sure we'll have lots of ideas. I hope so. I mean, we can sell merchandise as well. We can sell ringing books and all that sort of thing.
One question that's coming from Katrina says, there might be an opinion that there are enough bells in Cambridge already. How do we persuade the community that more bells are needed? So what are the particular features of St Clements and the new ring that make them stand out from the already existing rings?
Yeah, that's a reasonable question. At the moment, the towers used for teaching, the Great St Mary's and St Benet's. If you've rung at St Benet's, you probably know they're not the easiest bells around, and they're quite heavy. So they're quite challenging bells to use for that. They've also got a horrendous ladder up to the bell chamber for tying them. It's not something you want to run up and down every day to tie the bells. It's not a great place really for doing a lot of teaching. And then Great St Mary's, you've got to get your band or your pupils up the tower, which has a continuous stream of tourists going up and down for most of the week. Not at the moment, of course, but then we're not really thinking about at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it almost links back into the availability of the bells. So is the model that the bells are available all the time, that the part-time administrator is there, or is there a facility for getting access to bells outside those times?
Well, I think just like any other church, you could arrange to let visitors in if you knew they were coming at a particular time and someone was available. And hopefully we'll have some volunteers to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yep. Stephen Burr comments that if people think there are too many bells in Cambridge, you could always suggest they try Oxford. Yeah, that's true. Christopher Dawes says that at St Mary's Scilly, residents were invited to donate £15,000 to purchase a bell in memory of a loved one. The treble was reserved for general donations, and he reports that the funds were raised for the project within 6 weeks.
Gosh.
Gosh, yes, indeed. Yes, I mean, if anyone feels they missed out on the Isles of Scilly and they'd like to purchase a bell for £15,000, then yes, there's potentially some going. I don't know.
Well, I've rung on the bells at Scilly several times, but I didn't know about that, how the funds were raised.
Yes, I'm also very glad to say that Judith Webster is listening in tonight. Judith is Felicity's mum, so thank you very much for your message. We talked earlier about the timescale. So is the message that we're essentially now dependent on funds to start the next phase? Obviously current lockdown permitting.
Yes, the lockdown's affecting us a bit at the moment because the architect's been furloughed, and we need to get the building work out to tender in order to get an accurate price for the building work. So that's a bit irritating. We hope to have a more accurate target by now. But assuming that our guesswork is roughly right, then we need to have enough money in the bank to do the basic building work. So to build the ringing chamber, the balcony, the stairs, put the bells in, do all the other work up the top of the tower. We've got to have enough money to do all of that before we can start, because we can't risk running out of money partway through.
Nicholas Smith notes that the augmentation at Great Shelford, all 6 bells were bought by individuals, and the plan had to advance from augmentation from 6 to 8 as they had more donors than bells. So I don't know what your reply to that would be, but again, I think if anyone feels hard done by.
I mean, is he talking about people living in the village rather than ringers? I guess so.
I would suspect so.
It's a bit different, I think, with the city centre church. The actual parish of St Clements is tiny, and none of the congregation really come from the parish. We have had 1 or 2 emails of support from people who live locally. We haven't had any complaints. The only comments we've had from local residents have been very supportive. But I can't quite think of anyone to particularly approach to buy a bell.
John Harrison asked whether you've thought about subdividing donations. So, for example, headstocks. So he comments that in a previous project he had 6 headstocks which have plaques recording a donor or person commemorated.
Yes, I mean, I've toyed with the idea of sort of listing individual items, and we've got an itemized price list for all the bits of bell, but yeah, I don't know. No one has particularly asked to do that yet, put it that way. What I think would make more sense, although it's dependent on the sort of sensitivities in the church, would be to have some sort of board on the wall with details of the bells, details of the inscriptions, and perhaps a list of donors on that. So like a framed thing on the wall.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. We've had a note in from Simon Rudd, who's obviously been very, very closely involved with the Mancroft Ringing Discovery Centre, but unfortunately it says he had to duck out a little bit earlier and apologises for not staying for the Q&A. So it's very good to hear from Simon, and yeah, I think would it be fair to say that the Mancroft Ringing Discovery Centre has provided some proportion of the model and the inspiration for the project at St Clements?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was involved a bit in the Mancroft project as well, and yeah, I mean, I got a lot of support from Simon, and I think that they've done a fantastic job at Mancroft. But it is a different sort of job, different project, but has the same basic aim, which is to sort of make ringing more accessible to people who aren't already ringers.
Okay, well, I think that probably draws to a close the questions, unless anyone has anything else. But I'd like to thank you very much, Barry, for taking the time tonight to explain the project. It's been a great presentation. I think it's fantastic that you're able to come into the church, and even though the view that we have of it is slightly restricted, I think it's a great model for it as a facility that people can use for purposes other than attending church services, which I think is a real a bonus. I have to say I've been very impressed by the church on the occasions that I've been to visit, for the facilities available, and I think turning it into a very open multi-use space, I think is a fantastic idea, and getting lots of people involved will be very beneficial for the future of the church, I think is the way I look at it. So thank you very much for your time this evening. I don't know whether you have any words that you'd like to say in terms of summary.
No, I don't think so. Nothing more to add. Thank you, Dave.
Richard Pargester has a late question. He says that you'll be teaching to ART standards. Can you expand on this? A newly qualified ART teacher would not be gold standard. That takes up the next half an hour.
That's a long one to answer. I've ART qualified myself. I find their teaching methods very helpful. I think it's a good scheme to give people a basic qualification and some sort of confidence. But as Richard says, it's not enough, and unless the teaching is well supervised, just the ART qualification by itself doesn't mean very much. I would agree with Richard there. But it's a good technique that they teach.
Absolutely, I'd go. I'd very much go along with that. We teach on the ART syllabus at Histon, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's so important in situations where you need teachers and students to be fungible, as in you don't necessarily need the same students there and the same teachers there every week. I think that's the real value of ART. That because everyone has the same terminology, the same ideas, the same basic course of teaching, it's very easy to pick up where someone's at in learning to ring, and it removes that individual one-to-one relationship, teacher to pupil, and I think that's almost essential if a ringing centre is going to be a success.
I think it's essential for us. And I also think there's enough flexibility in the way that the ART sort of techniques that individual teachers can actually probably teach the way they want, but using their own mix of those techniques. I don't find it too restrictive at all.
That's interesting. Stephen Burr also has a question or observation saying that the timing is perhaps unfortunate in the sense that many towers or societies are not able to meet for meetings or general meetings, or they've been postponed for whatever reason due to the current COVID-19 situation. And he says that obviously there may be people out there who intend to donate towards this project, but just aren't able to commit at the moment because there's no meeting mechanism to agree any donation. And it seems that a shame if they come along later down the line, if they could have been counted towards a dedication of some sort. I can imagine that several Towers may be thinking of a donation in memory of a particular person, but obviously that AGMs have been postponed this year until much later in the year. So I don't know whether there's any response to that.
Only that I hope that we'll all be meeting again before too long, and it's not going to happen in the next couple of months. So I think there's time for us to, for groups like that to hopefully get together and start meeting again. Maybe the next round of annual district meetings would be not too late as well.
Tom Ridgman notes that the EDA Bell Restoration Fund changed the constitution to allow for online meetings to be called when necessary. So, but I presume that you're already well engaged with that as a potential option.
I don't know. I have put in an application to the EDA fund, but I haven't heard anything back from them.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, well, I think that probably draws the conversation to a close. So I'd say thank you very much again for your time. Thank you all those who've got a hand up over here. Let's just check. Oh, all good. So yeah, I think thank you all to all of those who've attended this evening. Very interesting questions. I think we wish you all the very best success for this project, Barry. It's been wonderful watching it develop over the last few years. It's been wonderful watching St Clements develop over the last few years. I have to say that wonderful view out of the west door is a very, very great sign that the church is again open to the public, and I think it's great to see. So obviously not today, but it's been a change over the last few years. It's been very great to see. Okay.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thank you for hosting it.
No problem. All right. Goodbye. Good evening.
Bye for now.